we were talking about memory, right? Okay. So I just wanted to kind of go over the notes and, just make sure that we have covered everything. So I'm pulling it up here. And you said you have your notes? Okay. So I thought that we could do the notes together. And okay, I have my memory notes up. So, do you remember what unit we're being tested on? It was memory in everyday life. Okay. So let me scroll down and find that. Well, at least we're on the last lesson. Yeah. Because it's kind of a lot of information. And it always feels good to just be done with it, Yeah. Okay, so let me find the long-term memory. Or, not long-term memory. The memory in everyday life is what we were talking about. Okay. So, alright, so memory in everyday life, I'm going to title this an everyday life, and I'll send you this, but I think we should just kind of go through and decide together what we think is important and not important. Okay, good. Alright, so memory in everyday life. So memory does not work like a video recorder. People don't encode or retrieve every aspect of an event perfectly. Okay. I mean, that makes sense. You don't have like a videotape in your head to remember everything. It's just kind of how you remember it. I remember everything perfect. So, what a person encodes depends on his or her priorities, her past experience or expectations, and the current demands. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. And then, do you have anything to add to that? Okay, so you said what people remember about an event can also depend on what happened after the event, their biases and expectations, and reports from others. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I was wondering if you could help me a little bit with what do they mean by the biases? Okay, so biases, like when there's a state of arousal or alertness is high, people tend to narrow their focus to only certain aspects of an event. Okay, that makes sense, yeah, thank you. You're a very great study buddy. Okay, yeah, so I was wondering if, could you maybe give me an example of that, just to make sure that I know, what is going on. So, example would be victims of a violent crime report great detail about the weapon, but not the perpetrator. People rely heavily on their expectations and prior experience. Okay. Another example would be people rely on their schemas as a participant. So if you're pulled over for a speeding ticket, after you've received a ticket, a friend asks, did the police officer ask if you knew how fast you were going? And you believe he did, not necessarily because you recall the question, but because you know that is a common question for a traffic violation. So it's just kind of with your schema and what you already know, your brain will already interpret all of that. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Alright, so, misinformation introduced after learning. Right. so there was a really cool study on here. It was Elizabeth Loftus and colleagues demonstrated that misinformation introduced after an event can alter our recollection of the original event. So if you hear anything differently, even though you were there and you saw it, you can have a different memory based on new information that you got. That's interesting, right? So I think the study was participants who viewed a car moving through a yield sign were asked how fast the car was going when it went through a stop sign. At a later memory test, those who were asked about the stop sign during questioning misremembered seeing a stop sign instead of a yield sign. Okay, if that makes sense. Okay, so you can also get misinformation by pictures. I know that you said you had good notes on this. Could you share? Okay, so photographs. I'm gonna put this, and I'll send all this to you. But I think it just helps talking about it, you know. Yeah. So photographs. So who was this by? Loftus and Pickerel in 1995 demonstrated that asking people to repeatedly imagine childhood events that plausibly occurred but never really happened can result in false memories for those events. People who thought extensively about events that never happened to them began to believe they did experience those events. So if someone asks you if, so I'm trying to think of an example of this. So if someone asked you if you got lost in a mall when you were a child, but you never really did, but because someone asked you that, you created that memory in your head. Is that right? Okay, thank you. So the false memory effect is exaggerated when people see altered photos made to look like they were taken at the event. So you might see a photo of you and your mom in a hot air balloon may lead you to believe that you were actually in a balloon ride with your mom. So pictures can make you think things that didn't really happen. Okay, so it can actually be exaggerated with real photos. So if you're asked to imagine putting a slime in your teacher's desk in 2nd grade, you're more likely to remember the event if you're shown a real picture of your 2nd grade class. Okay, that makes sense. Alright, so let's see. I think we should also talk about the biases at retrieval. So we rely on information and we rely on our expectations and experience when we attempt to retrieve info. So an example, if I had a lineup of suspects for a crime, you would assume the perpetrator is somewhere in the lineup, even when the real perpetrator is absent from the lineup. People are far more likely to guess the wrong person than to report they don't see the perpetrator in the lineup. So as a result, now many types of lineups are structured so that the victims are presented with one image at a time with a yes or no answer. That's interesting. Did that part make sense? Okay. Yeah, that made sense to me. Okay. And then, alright, so I think the next thing we should talk about is the flashbulb memories. I remember the professor did say that this will be on the test, so I think we should talk about this. Can you remind me of what that is? I actually didn't take good notes on this. Okay, it's a term to refer to the recollection of extremely significant personal or historical events. Okay, thank you, that makes sense. So would that mean like an event like for Americans, like 9/11, they're called flashbulb memories because they were thought to reflect permanent, accurate memories of the profound events. And so you said that research now says that flashbulb memories are not immune to be forgotten. Are not immune to being forgotten. Okay. Makes sense. Okay, so, and you said people are often confident in their memory of details of a flashbulb event. These events are subject to the same distortions and forgetting as any everyday event. 40% of the details of these events are distorted or misremembered. Well, that's very interesting because you would think that, they have a better memory of it, So that's a little interesting. Okay, so the next one is okay, so we talked about flashbulb. And then perspective memory, you said that you didn't have notes on this, so you want me to fill you in? Okay, I can do that. Alright, so this one's kind of heavy. So, the professor said since the time of Ebbinghaus, memory researchers have focused mainly on studying explicit retrospective memory of conscious recollection for past events. In recent years, there has been increased interest in prospective memory, or remembering to perform actions in the future, such as remembering to put the garbage out on Wednesday nights, and remembering to include an attachment in an email. So, prospective memory has important implications. There are many prospective memory demands in everyday life, in both work and non-work settings. And one of the central functions of human memory is to plan for future actions so we can respond appropriately to upcoming events. So, yeah, I haven't really gotten into it yet, but I'll let you know in a second. So, prospective memory. So, in a typical retrospective memory task, you might be presented with a list of words to learn, and then at some point, the experimenter puts you in a retrieval mode. That is, the experimenter asks you to search memory and start remembering the list of words that was presented earlier. Okay, so what makes it different for prospective memory is that the experimenter does not put participants in retrieval mode at the time remembering is to occur. So, in remembering to give a friend a message, for example, there is no one there to remind you to check your memory for what you were supposed to do when you encounter the friend. Instead, you want to rather process your friend as a friend. You have to somehow switch seeing your friend as a cue as an action. Does that make sense? Kind of, okay. So it's kind of like when you're doing your retrieval or retrospective memory, someone's telling you that you're going to have to remember these, but prospective memory doesn't tell you that you're going to have to remember it. They don't, but you know you already have to remember it. Am I saying that right? Does that make sense? Okay. Sorry. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so let's go over the processes in which involve prospective memory. So, a central question in prospective memory literature is, how does the cognitive system accomplish remembering when we are not specifically trying to remember at a time? Okay. Alright, does that make sense? Okay. So one second. Okay, monitoring. In some situations when we form an intention, we initiate monitoring processes. We can sometimes feel like active and conscious monitoring. So perspective is the monitoring of your own tasks. I have to remember to do this, I have to remember that. And then spontaneous retrieval is when you are likely to rely on another cue, such as something popping into your mind. And then there's two types of prospective memory tasks. There's the time-based prospective memory task. So you plan to do an action in a certain time, such as remembering to call a friend in 10 minutes. And then there's event-based, so you plan and to complete an action when you see a specific cue or event. For example, remembering to give your friend a message when you see her. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so let me see what he has for our activity today. Okay, so I thought we could try this. I thought it would be fun. If you're okay. So, what we're going to do is I'm going to I want you to listen to the words that I say. Okay. It's just a fun little activity about what we just learned, okay? Is that okay? Right. So the words are bed, quilt, dark, silence, fatigue, clock, snoring, night, toss, tired, night, artichoke, turn, night, rest, dream. Okay, I want you to write down as many words as you remember. Okay. Alright, did you recall the word sleep? Okay, we're good. So most people will recall the word sleep. And it's because when you recall the word sleep, all those words are kind of related to sleep. So it makes sense if you're recalling it. But it actually wasn't on the list. Okay, so I think, can we just go over this? Can you give me an example of prospective memory? Just want to make sure. Okay, good. And why is it important? I'm typing your answers so you can see what you said. Okay. And how is prospective memory different from other types of memory? Good, okay. I think you nailed it. Alright, well, I think that is everything. I'm going to send you our notes today, and if you don't get them, let me go ahead and send them to you now. And what's your email again? At gmail.com. Okay. I'm going to send you these now, and let me know when you get them. Got them. Okay. So, can you open it up? Can you see it okay? Yeah, okay. Good. Alright, well, if you have any questions, I put all the stuff that I think is going to be on the test, because the professor said it was over lesson 5, so that was just kind of the main ideas of lesson 5. So if you have any questions, just let me know. I really enjoyed studying with you today, and I hope that you can come over again and study with me again. It was a lot of fun, and you're a great study partner. You're very, very smart.